Some energy analysts say the long-awaited draft of the Integrated Resource Plan 2023 has many unanswered questions. This is a plan that many were looking to see how electricity demand and supply would be managed over the years. Now it comes as South Africans are still looking to see the end of rolling blackouts. Now the draft is out for public comment until the end of February. Mohamed Madhi, energy analyst and at Sinan Energy CEO, joins us live now. Thank you so much for your time. And I wonder then, let's start with your impressions. If you've seen the plan, is it adequate to deal with the energy challenges going into the future?
Look, no plan is adequate to deal with the challenges. It's only the action that counts. But in terms of the Integrated Resource Plan, I think what we really need to keep in mind is when a country typically in the past developed an IRP, they were more or less in control of the path that energy provision was going to unfold over time. The big change that has occurred in the last few years is this move to decentralization. So this means that governments are no longer in full control of how energy is going to be provided in the country. And in particular, a number of businesses, individuals, institutions will start building their own power plants because the policy allows for that. And those power plants are generally going to be more efficient and cheaper than any of the power that Eskom can provide. So this, in my view, is one of the biggest issues that the IRP does not address adequately. What this means is that government has to focus on what is in its control. And unfortunately, going forward, there isn't a great deal within its control when it comes to generation capacity.
So then when it comes to, some of the, for example, the proposed energy mix, one thinks about the fact that there's some concerns by some who are saying that, there are options being made for solar, for example, for wind, among others. But others are saying that it's difficult to interrogate this particular plan, particularly in the absence of, some of the assumptions that are going to be used here in the modeling. I wonder then if you agree with that.
I do. Generally, I do. Look, I think, there was a very famous ice hockey player that said, you have to move to where the puck is going to be, not to where it currently is. And I think government's plan is looking at the situation as it currently is. It of course, looks a little bit into the future, but has dealt with that inadequately. Does not fully grasped the changes and the trends and the real impact of those trends going forward. Let me give you a simple example. 3 years from now, solar, wind, and battery energy storage will be cheaper than any other form of power and will be capable of providing baseload power for most of Eskom's tariff classes. So I'll just repeat that. Solar, wind, and battery energy storage will be capable of providing baseload power cheaper than most of Eskom's tariff classes. That has not been adequately taken account of. Now, can you imagine the impact of that? And if we just think about what's happened over the last couple of years, around 4,000 megawatts being implemented by the private sector, either in construction or currently being implemented, that's 10% of the grid. Over the next 3 years, that number will escalate anywhere between 20 and 45%. So the grid will look very different. Energy provision will look very different. And that has not been taken into account properly in the IRP. It still assumes that central control has the ability to determine the shape of the energy future in the country, which it doesn't. It's losing that effect. And then to drive the point home a little bit further, when Telkom was in a similar situation 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and we had the cellular operators still starting up, government thought that they could shape the communications future of the country. But of course, they couldn't. And ultimately, it was the new operators, the cellular operators, that displaced the fixed line operators. That same analogy holds in the energy industry. Decentralized power, it's not exact analogy, but the same analogy holds in the energy industry. Decentralized power is going to be replacing grid-based power. So I think government is better placed to focus on the transmission network and making that transmission network as smart and as flexible and as capable and as real-time as possible. So that independent...
Pardon me, Mohamed. I suppose then, I mean, listening to what you're saying, the grid will be looking different in the next couple of years. And when you go through the plan, it talks about how, for example, right up until 2030, we may be still seeing some deficit when it comes to, energy security. And the fact that it plans for 2 time horizons, 2023 to 2030 and 2031 to 2050. Then, I suppose then, if the issue of costing is likely to also change in the future, this information would then be sufficient to also put as part of the plan so that those who are interrogating it can also interrogate the cost or projected costs of some of these options that are being looked into.
That's exactly right. They should be interrogating that. But again, I think the idea of a centralized mindset needs to change, and that you have a committee or a set of people or a set of departments or even interdepartmental working groups working out an integrated resource plan where they simply don't have control over all of the variables. So they need to focus on those aspects where they can make the most meaningful difference. And that meaningful difference would be in smartening up our transmission network. That's really the government needs to start focusing on. Generation capacity, like it or not, is going to be in the hands of those that use it and in the hands of private sector generation, companies.
Mohamed, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully some of those points that you're raising, you'll be able to put them in those public comments, because it's out now for public discussion before the 23rd of 2024. But thank you so much for sharing those insights with us. This particular document is out there for public comment. You've got until the 23rd of February to make your submissions. That's Mohamed Madhi, energy analyst, and Sinan Energy CEO.